The last warm breath of October 1953 drifted over La Crosse, Wisconsin, the kind of quiet Friday night that made the town feel sealed in glass. The leaves were almost gone from the trees, the street lights hummed, and a 15-year-old honor student named Evelyn Hartley buttoned her pink cardigan as she stood in her family's doorway. She was polite, shy, and precise about everything she did. That night she was going to babysit for the Rasmussens, college friends of her father's, while they went to a homecoming game at the university. It was supposed to be a simple evening: keep the toddler asleep, study for a test, and call her parents before 10. She packed her books, slipped on her saddle shoes, and promised to check in later. When her father drove her across town, the lights of the football stadium were glowing against the clouds. They reached the small white-framed house on Cooley Drive around 7 o'clock. The Rasmussens met her at the door, thanked her, and gave quick instructions. The baby monitor was beside the crib, snacks in the kitchen, doors locked before bed. Evelyn smiled, waved as they left, and turned on the living room lamp. Nothing seemed unusual until hours later, when every clock in that house stopped mattering. By 10 p.m., her father began to worry. Evelyn was never careless about time. He called the Rasmussen house, no answer. He called again at 10:30, still nothing but a dull ring. At 11, he told his wife he was driving over just to make sure she hadn't fallen asleep. When he reached the house, the porch light glowed but no one came to the door. He rang the bell. Silence. He tried the handle, it was locked. He walked around the side yard, calling softly through the windows. The curtains were half drawn, and through a gap he could see an overturned ottoman, a lamp on its side. He felt the first cold bloom of fear. The back door was slightly open. Inside, the living room was in disarray, the rug bunched, one of her schoolbooks lying face down, her glasses twisted beside it. The radio still murmured from the corner, but there was no sign of Evelyn. Upstairs, the toddler slept peacefully in his crib, untouched. She hadn't just wandered off. Then he saw the smudge. A dark fingerprint on the basement window frame. Another on the sill. And a patch of grass beneath the window was trampled flat. When he shone his flashlight there, the beam caught something else, one of Evelyn's shoes, lying half in the mud, the strap broken clean through. Within an hour, police were swarming the yard. Officers combed the house, marking spots where they found blood on the walls, near the piano, and on the side steps leading to the yard. There were drag marks in the grass, a scattering of footprints, some small like hers, others larger, angled, erratic. It looked as if she had fought. The town's calm snapped like glass under pressure. Neighbors poured from their porches, whispering in the dark. Dogs barked. Flashlights danced through the trees. By midnight, word of the missing babysitter reached every radio in La Crosse. Detectives tried to piece together her last known moments. Around 7:15, a neighbor walking his dog had seen a girl matching Evelyn's description moving between rooms, turning lights on and off. Around 8:30, another neighbor noticed the porch light flicker twice then stay off. At 9:20, someone passing on the sidewalk thought they heard a scream, faint and sudden, followed by the slamming of a door. But no one called the police then. Screams were common when the football game was on. Now those minutes became a riddle. Officers expanded the search beyond the yard. They found her other shoe a few blocks away near a hedge. A small amount of blood dotted a retaining wall. A handprint stained with mud. Each piece felt like a breadcrumb leading nowhere. The blood was tested, it was her type. The next morning, hundreds of volunteers scoured fields, ditches, and creeks. Farmers searched barns. Boy Scouts walked grid patterns along Highway 33. Planes flew low over the woods. But there was no body, no clothing, nothing except rumors, a car seen idling near the neighborhood, a man spotted hitchhiking out of town, an open gate near the bluffs. For her parents, the hours blurred. Reporters crowded their yard, camera bulbs flashing through the kitchen window. Her mother couldn't speak without trembling. Her father answered every question with the same hollow sentence, "We just want our daughter back." By the second day, the police chief announced it as one of the most intensive searches in Wisconsin history. They drained sections of the river, dragged the lagoons, and tested fingerprints from every known drifter or ex-con in the area. Still, nothing. But the house itself told a story, one of struggle and control. Blood on the piano suggested she had tried to flee toward the back door. A belt found near the steps might have been used to restrain her. A ladder from the basement was shifted out of place, as if someone had entered or left through the small window. Whoever came for Evelyn knew the house's layout or had watched long enough to learn it. Night after night, people left porch lights burning for her. Parents who once felt safe letting their children roam after dark now locked every window. Fear crawled through La Crosse like fog off the Mississippi. Days became weeks. Leads collapsed. A truck driver claimed he saw a girl struggling in a passing car near Sparta, but by the time police checked, there was no trace. Bloodhounds followed scent trails that vanished at intersections. Newspapers began calling it the Babysitter mystery. Investigators considered every possibility. Did someone she knew pick her up? Was it a stranger passing through? Was it a botched burglary that turned into abduction? Theories multiplied faster than evidence. And then came the most haunting detail. Neighbors who had walked by that night remembered hearing a faint moaning or crying sound near the side of the house, but they assumed it was a radio left on. When officers played back the radio programs airing at that hour, one of them was a crime drama about a missing girl. The coincidence felt cruel. Every scrap of evidence was boxed and labeled, but the picture stayed incomplete. Evelyn Hartley had vanished into the black seam between ordinary life and nightmare. By November, winter winds cut through the streets. The posters of her smiling face began to curl at the edges on telephone poles. The city's hope thinned, but her parents refused to stop searching. They hired private investigators, wrote to national programs, even sent photos to FBI profilers. Her father retraced the same streets nightly, staring at the river's dark water as if it might answer back. At Christmas, her mother kept her presents wrapped under the tree. The town tried to move on, but the silence lingered. Doors that used to stay unlocked now bore new chains. Teenagers swapped ghost stories about the girl who disappeared while babysitting. Some said her spirit still wandered Cooley Drive, searching for a way home. But the truth was colder than any ghost. Somewhere out there was a man who knew exactly what happened in that small house on that quiet October night, and he had never been found. The case file grew heavier each year, a monument to uncertainty. Yet the image of that 15-year-old girl in her cardigan and glasses never faded. She had simply stepped into the shadows, leaving behind a blood trail and a silence that no one in La Crosse could ever forget. And that silence was only the beginning. Because in the weeks to come, the search for Evelyn Hartley would take a darker turn, one that peeled back the town's calm surface to reveal something far more disturbing underneath. The days after Evelyn's disappearance unfolded like a fever dream, blinding daylight searches followed by sleepless nights haunted by the image of a girl who never came home. Every morning brought new headlines, new rumors, new theories that promised hope and delivered nothing but echoes. By October 27, the entire town of La Crosse was gripped by dread. Hundreds of volunteers continued combing the fields and ravines on the city's outskirts. Men walked shoulder to shoulder through waist-high grass, women made sandwiches and coffee at search stations, local pilots circled the countryside. From above, the land looked scarred with footprints. Sheriff Robert Scamp, a man with deep lines carved into his face from years on the force, led the investigation. He'd worked murders before, but never something like this, never a case that felt both organized and impossible. He stood in the Rasmussen living room again and again, retracing Evelyn's movements, as if repetition might summon the truth from the shadows. On the third day, police dogs picked up a strong scent trail leading from the yard through a cluster of backyards toward a nearby highway. The trail stopped abruptly near tire tracks. It was the first real clue, a hint that a vehicle had been waiting. But whose? The prints suggested two men's shoes, one larger, one smaller, neither belonging to Evelyn. The window glass had smears consistent with gloved hands. Whoever took her had come prepared, moving with speed and confidence. The theory forming in investigators' minds was worse than random violence, it was premeditated. Inside the police station, maps of La Crosse were pinned with colored flags marking sightings, evidence, and rumors. Detectives rotated in 12-hour shifts, analyzing every detail. Over 50 drifters and traveling workers were questioned. A few gave strange stories. One man claimed he'd been offered $50 by a stranger to help move furniture late that Friday night. Another said he saw a small figure being carried near the railroad yard around midnight. None of them could be verified. Then came the blood evidence. Samples from the piano, basement steps, and grass were sent to Madison for testing. The report confirmed what everyone feared: it was all the same type as Evelyn's. Not enough to prove death, but enough to suggest she'd been gravely injured. Her father, Richard Hartley, began assisting police himself. He'd drive around rural La Crosse at night, flashlight on the passenger seat, scanning fields and barns. Locals would sometimes see his headlights flicker through fog, a lonely car creeping along the back roads. He said he couldn't sleep knowing she might still be out there, cold, waiting. On the fifth day, a farmer 20 miles south reported something strange: a blood-stained undergarment tangled in a barbed wire fence near his property. When police retrieved it, they found small traces of grass and clay consistent with soil near Cooley Drive. Evelyn's mother fainted when she was told. But again, tests were inconclusive: no DNA, just type O blood, her type, but shared by millions. The newspapers grew more lurid. Blood trail vanishes into woods. Babysitter abducted by stranger. Reporters crowded press conferences, snapping flashbulbs as Sheriff Skemp repeated the same line: "We are following every lead." The community's fear hardened into obsession. Doors stayed locked day and night. Fathers carried shotguns to the porch. Teenagers canceled Halloween parties. The town felt cursed, as if the night Evelyn vanished had never really ended. Detectives soon turned to a local handyman named Ed Gein, whose odd behavior in neighboring Plainfield caught attention, but that trail went cold. His own horrors would surface years later, unrelated to Evelyn. Still, his name lingered in the file as a grim footnote of coincidence. Then came a far stranger suspect, a refrigeration repairman named Melvin, who worked near the Rasmussen neighborhood and was known for odd comments about young girls. Police searched his home and found blood-stained work clothes, but they turned out to belong to a butchered deer. False alarm. Every lead dissolved into mist. By November, winter settled over Wisconsin like a shroud. Snow fell on the posters that bore her face. The case that once electrified the nation was losing momentum. Yet in the background, one man refused to let it die: a local radio broadcaster named Henry Cook. He began dedicating nightly segments to Evelyn's story, replaying the details, interviewing townspeople. He called it The Echo in the Dark. Cook's program reignited public attention. Tips poured in: a sighting in Minnesota, a car abandoned near a quarry, a woman claiming she'd heard screams from a basement days after the abduction. Each one forced police to chase shadows again. One of those shadows, though, led somewhere real. A teenage couple reported finding a blood-stained rag and a torn piece of fabric along a back road near Lafarge, nearly 40 miles away. The cloth was confirmed as belonging to the same style of clothing Evelyn wore that night. Beneath it, embedded in the dirt, was a heel print, small, feminine, with a crack across the sole. She had lost one shoe outside the house, now here was the matching mark. Forensic teams scoured the area. They discovered additional faint blood spatters leading toward a wooded ravine, but no remains. whoever had taken her had stopped there, maybe to transfer her to another vehicle or to dispose of something else. Whispers spread that the kidnapper might have been a traveling salesman or a long-haul trucker who passed through the region regularly. Local gas stations were questioned, drivers photographed, routes traced. But with each passing week, the trail cooled, like breath fading in winter air. Still, something darker was unfolding behind the scenes. In December 1953, a small-town convict named Thomas Devlin was questioned after being caught stealing a car. During interrogation, he muttered that he knew where the Hartley girl went. Police leaned in, heartbeats thudding. But Devlin quickly recanted, claiming he'd made it up for attention. Still, one statement lingered: she was alive for a while. They kept her in a cellar. The idea chilled every man in that room. Was it a lie? Or an accidental truth? They raided several rural properties. One, an abandoned farmhouse outside La Crosse, had a trapdoor beneath the kitchen leading to a cramped cellar. Down there, the air was damp and foul, the walls stained with mildew. On the floor was a strip of cloth tied like a blindfold. It wasn't Evelyn's, but the discovery fed the growing fear that she hadn't been killed immediately. Psychics soon entered the story, as they often did in cases gone cold. One claimed Evelyn's body lay near water and stone. Another described a man with light hair and a scar across his hand. Each vision led to another fruitless dig. Even the FBI's involvement failed to produce new evidence. Without fingerprints or witnesses, they were chasing ghosts. Evelyn's parents grew older overnight. Their living room became a museum of her life: school medals, photos, the last book she'd been reading. They refused to change her room, as if she might walk back through the door. Meanwhile, Sheriff Skemp faced increasing pressure. Reporters accused him of losing control of the case, citizens demanded results. He doubled down, bringing in detectives from Chicago to review the evidence. One of them suggested something radical, that Evelyn might not have been the intended target at all. Maybe someone had planned to attack the Rasmussens and found her instead. It was the first theory that made a kind of tragic sense. But proof remained elusive. Years would pass before confessions began to surface, some real, most false. One man, serving time in South Dakota, claimed he'd buried her near a gravel pit. Police dug for 2 days, finding only rusted cans. Another drifter said he'd given a ride to a frightened girl near La Crosse the night of the abduction. He described her perfectly, even mentioning broken glasses. Yet his story fell apart when he couldn't describe the house she came from. By the spring of 1954, the case had slipped from national headlines, but in La Crosse, the nightmare never ended. Families still locked their doors early. Parents still forbade daughters from babysitting for strangers. Children still whispered that the babysitter ghost wandered the woods at night, calling for help. And beneath all that fear lay one unspoken truth: the monster who had taken Evelyn was likely still walking free, blending back into small-town life like any other neighbor. A shadow among them. Sheriff Skemp kept her file open until his retirement, years later, often staring at her photo in his office late at night. "She was too good," he once said quietly to a reporter. "Too kind. That's why it haunts me. Evil always notices the innocent first." But Evelyn's case would not stay buried in dusty archives. Decades later, her story would resurface, its details twisted, retold, and transformed into something part truth, part legend. Because some stories refuse to die, they evolve, finding new faces and new voices to carry their ghost forward. And in time, her disappearance would become the seed of another haunting tale, the one that inspired a generation later to ask a chilling question: what happens when the monster isn't from our nightmares, but from our own neighborhoods? The winter of 1953 turned La Crosse into a frozen portrait of grief. Snow covered the fields where hundreds had once surged, and the town lights flickered like distant candles over a grave no one could find. Evelyn Hartley's face, soft, smiling, framed by dark hair, stared from every newspaper box, every telephone pole, every shop window. Yet each passing day carried her further from the living and closer to myth. By the new year, the official investigation had stalled. Sheriff Skemp's team had run out of evidence. The blood was old, the trails buried under snow, and the witnesses contradictory. In a small meeting with Evelyn's father, Skemp promised, "We'll never close it." But even he knew that the longer a disappearance lasts, the quieter the truth becomes. In the months that followed, La Crosse became a town that refused to forget. At night, when the wind creaked through the houses, people swore they heard a girl's voice carried through the air, sometimes calling, sometimes crying. Others said they'd seen a flicker of light in the old Rasmussen home, long after it had been emptied. The stories began as whispers, then turned into folklore. And like all folklore, they carried fragments of fear that refused to die. For the Hartleys, life split into two halves before and after. Her father became a hollow man, methodical but distracted. He catalogued letters from strangers claiming to know what happened, hoping one might hold truth. Her mother, once lively and sociable, withdrew from everyone, keeping Evelyn's bedroom exactly as she'd left it, the schoolbook still on the desk, the pink sweater folded on the chair, the smell of her lavender perfume fading with the years. In 1954, the FBI sent a final report. It concluded that Evelyn was believed deceased due to probable abduction and homicide by person or persons unknown. That single sentence turned the mystery into tragedy. But not closure. Never closure. There were theories, hundreds of them. One claimed Evelyn had been taken by a passing railroad worker who buried her near the riverbanks. Another insisted she was abducted by a pair of traveling criminals from Illinois who later disappeared themselves. Yet another theory, darker and more personal, suggested that someone from within the community had orchestrated it, someone who knew her, or had watched her. That theory emerged from a chilling detail that came to light years later. A man named Ralph Taylor, who lived less than a mile from the Rasmussen home, was arrested in 1957 for an unrelated assault. During interrogation, he muttered something the officers didn't understand at first: "I should have never gone to that babysitter's house." When pressed, he laughed and said he was just joking. There was no physical evidence tying him to Evelyn, but the remark crawled into the record like a splinter. His house was searched. In his basement they found women's shoes, some children's clothing, and several cut ropes. Yet again, nothing conclusively linked him to her disappearance. He was released, and within a year, moved out of state. No one ever saw him again. As the decades passed, the case aged but never died. Detectives revisited the evidence with new technology. Forensic scientists tried to extract DNA from the old blood samples, but time had destroyed most of it. Even the shoe fragments had degraded beyond testing. The crime scene had become memory, and memory had become myth. By the 1980s, Evelyn's story had drifted into the realm of legend. It was taught in criminology courses as a symbol of the perfect unsolved case: no body, no suspect, only the heavy silence left behind. Television programs like Unsolved Mysteries revived it briefly, dramatizing the night she vanished. Their reenactments turned Cooley Drive into a ghost street, actors moving through darkened rooms, a flashlight beam cutting across an empty window, a girl's scream echoing over the sound of rain. Viewers wrote letters afterward, saying they'd grown up hearing about the babysitter who disappeared. And still, no one knew what had happened. But every mystery leaves behind ripples, and Evelyn's story became one of those ripples that never stopped spreading. Writers began weaving it into novels. Screenplays borrowed details from her life: the broken glasses, the blood trail, the open door. Even filmmakers decades later would cite her disappearance as an inspiration for the babysitter horror trope that dominated American cinema from the 1970s onward. When a Stranger Calls, Halloween, Black Christmas all bore faint fingerprints of the girl who vanished in 1953. In recent years, her name resurfaced again, this time not in police files, but in streaming scripts. Addison Rae's Monster series drew from several true disappearances, but Evelyn stood at its heart, the image of a young girl trapped in an ordinary night that turns into an abyss. In the show, her story becomes myth retold through a supernatural lens, but echoing the real horror that once silenced Crosse. Fans of the series began to search online, discovering that the fictional story wasn't fiction at all. And with that discovery came a new wave of fascination videos, podcasts, deep dive theories. The line between legend and reality blurred once again. But there's a reason Evelyn's story continues to haunt people after 70 years. It's not just the mystery, it's the feeling that something familiar and safe was ripped open, and what lay beneath was monstrous. She wasn't walking home alone at midnight. She wasn't in a dangerous city. She was a 15-year-old girl doing a kind favor for her father's friend, inside a locked house, in a quiet neighborhood. And still, someone found her. That's the part that never stops echoing. Every October, near the anniversary of her disappearance, locals still claim to see a flicker of movement near the old house long since remodeled, new family inside. They say porch lights sometimes go out at exactly 8:30 p.m., the time the neighbor once heard a scream. Others swear that if you drive down Cooley Drive late at night, your radio will cut to static right in front of the old address, as if something unseen is still reaching out, trying to be heard. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's guilt woven into the soil. Or maybe it's something else, something that refuses to rest. Because even after decades, there's still no evidence that Evelyn ever left Crosse. The river gave up nothing. The woods gave up nothing. And that's the cruelest part of all: disappearances leave no body to mourn, only the endless question of where the story ended. Her parents died never knowing. Her father's final words, according to a friend, were, "We'll find her in the light." No one ever did. And so Evelyn Hartley remains suspended in time between the ordinary and the unthinkable. Between a quiet Friday evening and a night that swallowed a girl whole. Her name became a warning, her face an echo, her story a reflection of the darkest corners of human nature. In every new retelling, whether whispered in small towns or reimagined on screens, she lives again for a moment, walking through that house one last time, checking on the sleeping child, unaware that evil is already outside the window. The door creaks. The light flickers. And the silence returns. The house on Cooley Drive still stands, though time has washed away nearly every trace of what happened there. The grass is neatly trimmed now, the siding replaced, the windows shining new. Families have come and gone. Children have played in the yard. Laughter has filled rooms that once rang with silence. Yet, when night falls and the wind drifts through the trees, there's something in the air, a stillness that doesn't belong. Neighbors say it's just the past echoing, a ghost of memory too heavy to die. But others whisper that the house remembers. They tell stories of small things, of lights flickering in patterns, of radios tuning themselves to static, of a faint sound from the basement, like a footstep or a sigh. The current owners refuse interviews, but those who have lived nearby swear that every October, as the anniversary approaches, the air around that home grows colder, like the ground itself is holding its breath. If ghosts exist, they say, they don't always appear to frighten us. Sometimes they wait to be found. But the truth about Evelyn Hartley isn't supernatural, it's human. That's what makes it terrifying. Someone planned that night. Someone watched her. Someone carried her away and hid what was left. That someone breathed the same air, walked the same streets, maybe even joined the search parties pretending to care. And that's why her story still crawls under people's skin. Because monsters don't always come from folklore, they're often born from ordinary faces. When the Monster series introduced the character inspired by Evelyn, millions of viewers felt that chill without knowing why. The girl in the show, trapped in a quiet town, watched through windows by something she couldn't see. It was fiction, but the emotions were real. The silence. The dread. The feeling of being watched while believing you're safe. Writers had borrowed Evelyn's tragedy and turned it into art, but for those who know her real story, the show's most disturbing moments felt like a mirror held to the past. There's a line in one of the episodes where the detective says, "Monsters don't hide under your bed. They ring your doorbell." That line could have been written for Crosse in 1953. Over the years, digital investigators, amateur sleuths, podcasters, forum dwellers have reopened the case with renewed obsession. They analyze old photographs, compare footprints, map timelines with satellite precision. Some believe the kidnapper was a local delivery driver who vanished a year later. Others argue it was part of a larger pattern of disappearances across the Midwest that authorities quietly ignored. One particularly haunting theory suggests that Evelyn's abduction was not random at all, that she was mistaken for someone else. Another girl her age, with similar features, had been staying nearby. The idea that she might have been taken by accident only deepens the tragedy, a twist of fate that turned a normal night into legend. Every so often, new evidence surfaces, an old letter, an anonymous confession, a witness who suddenly remembers something. Each spark ignites hope, but the flames die quickly. Time erases fingerprints, but it never erases guilt. In 2018, the Crosse Historical Society opened a small exhibit on Wisconsin's unsolved mysteries. Behind glass, they displayed Evelyn's school photo, one of her library cards, and a copy of the missing poster. Visitors described feeling a strange heaviness in front of it, a weight that wasn't sadness exactly, but something older, deeper. The curator said the exhibit light flickered twice during setup. "Old wiring," she laughed. But she didn't laugh again when it happened the next night. People still ask what really happened to Evelyn Hartley. The official answer is simple: no one knows. The real answer is less comforting: someone always did. Maybe that's why her story continues to live, reinventing itself through decades, across screens and pages, across voices that try to give her what she never had, an ending. But endings don't come for everyone. Some stories remain open wounds. In the end, Evelyn's disappearance is less about a single night and more about what it revealed: that safety is fragile, that evil doesn't always roar, it knocks quietly, steps softly, and vanishes before you even know it was there. And so, 70 years later, the wind still moves through Crosse with a whisper that sounds almost like her name. Somewhere between the living and the forgotten, a 15-year-old girl lingers, not in vengeance, not in peace, but in the space where memory becomes myth. If you listen closely on a quiet October night, you might still hear her. Not crying. Not calling for help. Just existing in the silence she left behind. Because some disappearances don't end. They just wait. Somewhere out there, the truth still exists, buried beneath decades of silence, hidden in the memory of someone who never spoke. Maybe an old man on his deathbed knows. Maybe a basement in some forgotten Wisconsin house still holds something no one dares to find. The past doesn't vanish, it just changes its disguise. Evelyn Hartley's name remains a wound that never healed, a reminder of how quickly a peaceful night can turn into history's darkest echo. Every October, when leaves turn red and the wind carries that hollow whistle through Crosse, it feels like she's walking those streets again, unseen but not gone. Because stories like hers don't fade, they wait for someone brave enough to listen. And maybe, when the right voice tells it again, the silence that swallowed her will finally break.